What is up, DS3TV? We are back for another video. This is the Norman Muslim War for Sicily, Battle of Sermani, 1063. And this is by Kings and Generals. Should be a good video. We started this series, I believe 2 days ago. I might have put out the video yesterday. Yeah, I probably put out the video yesterday, and then I probably did the video. Either I put it out yesterday or Monday because I kind of forgot. We did have the blackout, which meaning the J. Paul video is coming out next week because I definitely need some time for like research and all of that stuff. So yeah, that's gonna happen next week. Not coming out this week because of the whole blackout that we had, so that's nice. Yeah, so let's get into the video and play. Also subscribe to the channel. Want to get 1,000 subscribers by my birthday. Thank you guys for 962 subscribers at the time of making this video, and let's get into it.
Within 4 decades of their arrival in Italy, the Norse-descended Normans had sunk their claws into the peninsula, humbling many of the local rulers, including the Pope in Rome, whose alliance was defeated by them. Now, with their foothold secure in the heart of the Latin world, they turned their attention to the south. Welcome to part 2 of our series on the Normans in Italy, where they will fight against the Muslims in Sicily. Thanks to Call of War for sponsoring this video. Call of War is a free-to-play real-time cross-platform strategy game played by millions of users worldwide, with historically accurate army units that move in real-time on historical maps, a huge tech tree with over 120 different units, battles with up to 100 human players, with a complex economy and trade. Everything is possible in Call of War. Play through all the different scenarios and outcomes of war and fight other players in real time. Tank rush your opponents, establish air superiority, flood enemy ground with battalions of infantry, bombard coastal cities with mighty naval fleets, or dominate with secret weapons such as nuclear bombers and V2 rockets. You can play objectives each week. Support our channel by downloading Call of War via the link in the description and receive a free starter pack with 1 month of high command and 13,000 gold with a value of $10. Hurry, it's only available for 30 days for those who sign up through the link in the description. The Normans had not been idle since their victory over Pope Leo at Civitate. By the year 1060, they had stabilized their rule over northern Apulia, properly conquered Calabria, and seized a sizable chunk of Campania. The papacy was forced to abandon their plan to expel them from Italy, and instead render legitimacy to the Norman realm, recognizing it as the Duchy of Apulia and Calabria. Ruling this duchy was the redoubtable Robert de Hauteville, known to friend and foe as Guiscard, a title translating to the Cunning. He and his brother Roger de Hauteville were the head and backbone of Norman Italy, and in time would establish themselves as 2 of the greatest conquerors of the Middle Ages. Nominally a papal vassal, the Normans remained restless and free-spirited. Always on the lookout for more land and plunder, they would soon turn their attention towards the Strait of Messina and eye the fertile lemon fields across the narrow waters. By the mid-11th century, the Isle of Sicily had been under Muslim rule for over 150 years. It had been the Tunisian Aghlabid dynasty that had ousted the Byzantines in 830 AD, before later being subsumed by the Fatimid juggernaut. In 948, an independent emirate ruled by the Kalbids was established on the island. Sicily had flourished under Islamic purview. It was considered perhaps the wealthiest island in the Mediterranean, its climate sunny and warm, its fields rich and fertile. Its capital city, Palermo, was the second largest in all of Europe, with a massive population of 350,000 citizens. However, by 1060, not all was well on the idyllic isle. The last Kalbite emir had been assassinated in 1052, and with his death, the island fractured politically into 3 principalities, all feuding with one another for dominion over the whole realm. Present also was a sizable population of native Greek Christians who sought greater autonomy and a co-religionist protector from across the sea. The Pope hoped that Guiscard would conquer Sicily in the name of Christendom, and made Robert Guiscard the Duke of Sicily, despite him having no control over the island.
That's an interesting thing that the Pope did. Just, made him the ruler over Sicily, even though he had no power over Sicily at that moment. That's a power move.
Of course, Robert needed very little convincing from his spiritual suzerain to open up the new southern frontier and attempt to conquer the rich island. The opportunity to invade Sicily came when the ruler of Syracuse, Ibn Timna, who was deeply embroiled in a blood feud with his rival, the ruler of Agrigento, Ibn Hawes, approached Roger de Hauteville in Calabria and asked for his aid. Ibn Timna had been thoroughly crushed in battle and had finally become desperate enough to turn to the Normans for help in subduing his foe, a notion which by now everyone else in southern Italy would call a profoundly bad idea. Roger, the younger and more hot-blooded of the Hauteville brothers, jumped at this opportunity. In the winter of 1061, 150 mounted Norman knights and a handful of auxiliaries crossed the strait and landed in the hinterlands northwest of Messina. They pillaged the rich and undefended countryside before handily crushing a Muslim army that had been raised against them. Roger and his knights attacked Messina, but were driven from the city's fortified walls. They retreated to their ships, only to find that they had been scattered by a Muslim fleet. They bunkered on the stormy beach for 3 days, fending off raids from Messina, until on the 4th day their ships returned and they evacuated safely with their loot in tow. While their first foray into Sicily had been something of a misstep, the Normans now knew of the riches of the Southern Isle and resolved to return. In the spring of the next year, they levied another army to do just that, comprised of 2,000 infantry and 450 mounted knights, led this time by both Hauteville brothers. Knowing they would need to outmaneuver the Muslim fleet to avoid meeting a watery grave before even touching Sicilian soil, they devised a plan. Robert mustered the lion's share of his men and ships at the Rock of Scylla to divert the attention of the Muslim fleet. Indeed, as the forces of Ibn Hawes gathered on the opposite end of the strait to oppose the Norman landing, Roger had sneakily made the crossing 5 miles south with some 500 men. They prowled the countryside undetected and struck Messina from the south. Roger was dumbfounded to find that Robert's diversion had worked better than they could have ever expected. The city had been left entirely unprotected. The Normans seized it with barely a fight, and the Muslim army outside the city, realizing they were caught in a pincer, fled westwards. The Greek Christian citizens of Messina greeted the Normans as liberators and offered the conquering knights a thanksgiving service. The Hautevilles rested briefly before continuing their campaign. Soon their Muslim ally Ibn Timna attached his army to theirs, and together they marched deeper into the heart of the island. Much of eastern Sicily was loyal to Ibn Timna and did not resist the movement of his Norman allies. The town of Paterno fell quickly, and the Normans soon came upon the mountain fortress of Enna, the principal stronghold of Ibn Hawes. Knowing they could never penetrate the castle walls, the Normans set to pillaging the countryside to harass Ibn Hawes into open battle. This worked like a charm, and despite vastly outnumbering his foe, Hawes's light Arabic infantry proved no match for heavy Norman knights, who crushed their opponents in the field. Despite this great victory, Robert knew that he was overextended and thus left the fortress untaken, consolidating his gains in northeastern Sicily while allowing most of his soldiers to return to their families in Apulia with loot in hand. Roger, on the other hand, rode into the predominantly Greek Christian town of Troina, which welcomed him as a liberator. Here he wintered, but then he learned that one Judith of Evro had arrived in Calabria. She was the daughter of a Franco-Norman noble and was Roger's betrothed, so he returned home to marry her. However, marital bliss would soon turn into domestic turmoil. Roger was incensed with his older brother's tendency to take the lion's share of land and loot won in their campaigns. The younger Hauteville demanded titles and privileges and threatened to take them by force. Absolutely enraged by his little brother's insolence, Robert rode down to Roger's capital at Mileto and laid siege to it. Roger slipped out of his capital in disguise and into the nearby town of Gerace. He was pursued ardently by his older brother, but the townsfolk of Gerace, loyal to Roger, managed to capture Robert and present him to the junior de Hauteville. Roger now had a choice to make. He realized that without Robert, his political ambitions were crippled, and he loved his brother. In an almost comical fashion, the two siblings embraced one another in a teary-eyed reconciliation, naturally after Roger was promised his fair share of land and loot. A civil war had been prevented, and the conquest of Sicily could now continue. The situation in the southern isle had become decidedly more complex. Ibn Timna had been ambushed and slain while campaigning against Ibn Hawwas in northern Sicily, thereby eliminating the Normans' only local ally. This did not deter the Hautevilles, and in the summer of 1062, Roger returned to Sicily while Robert remained in Apulia to put down Byzantine-supported rebellions in the region. The Norman expeditionary force arrived back in Troina to a surprisingly chilly reception. Initially, the Greek Christians hailed the Normans as liberators, but they soon realized that the Normans were harsh overlords who took what they wanted with little regard for the law. Roger did not pick up on the tension in the city and departed with the bulk of his army to besiege the city of Nicosia, leaving Judith behind. The local population immediately rose up in revolt, forming a riotous mob and attempting to kidnap Judith, hoping that having her as a hostage would provide them the leverage needed to force Roger to withdraw from their city. The small Norman garrison left in Troina rallied to the defense of their lady, and a fierce melee ensued across the narrow streets. From there, the situation snowballed. Roger managed to gallop back to the city in time to join the garrison, but to his dismay, he found that thousands of Muslims from the surrounding countryside had taken up arms and flooded into Troina to aid the Christian Greeks. Overwhelmed, Roger was forced to order a general retreat into Troina's citadel, where the Normans holed up and prepared to weather a siege. For 4 months they held out within the citadel, suffering through a brutally icy winter. Once again, the Normans' salvation came through sheer luck. The Saracen soldiers guarding the perimeter had taken to drinking red wine to keep themselves warm in the frigid snows. Normally forbidden from drinking alcohol by the laws of their faith, they soon proved to be quite susceptible to its intoxicating effects. Roger soon realized he could take advantage of this drunkenness, and on a chilling January night, led a foray beyond his makeshift barricades and into the open streets. One by one, they subdued the Muslim outposts, all manned by inebriated, snoozing guards. Their position now secure, they engaged the Greek and Saracen besiegers in a general melee and retook the city. By now, the Muslim rulers of Sicily had come to realize what the Byzantines and Lombards had before them. The Normans were no mere mercenaries. They were a threat to the very existence of Islamic rule on their island. Quickly, the Saracen princes set aside their differences and put up a united front against the Norman encroachment. They looked across the Mediterranean for reinforcements, and received them from the Zirid Sultan Temim, who sent a sizable army of North African Berbers to Sicily, led by his princely sons, to crush the invasion. Roger was forced to return to Calabria to retrieve more horses for his knights, having eaten most of the ones they had during the siege. In the meantime, his wife Judith proved a capable martial commander, heading the defense of Troina while bands of Normans headed out to pillage the countryside for supplies. By the time Roger returned to Sicily, a massive Muslim army had gathered at Palermo and was heading eastwards towards his position. It was a dire situation. Roger had only around 130 knights and 500 infantrymen at his disposal. He could not count for help from his older brother either, as Robert's forces were tied down fighting the Byzantines in Apulia. The Benedictine monk Malaterra claims that the Saracen army numbered up to 50,000. While this is almost certainly hyperbole, it is safe to assume the Muslims numbered at least several thousand. Unwilling to sustain another drawn-out siege, Roger dispatched his cousin Serlo with a contingent of 30 knights to secure Cerami, a town 8 miles west of Troina. In June of 1063, the two forces clashed. The Muslim vanguard was the first to come upon Serlo's 30 knights, who had barred themselves within the walls of Cerami. The Muslims flung themselves upon the town walls, but were unable to dislodge their Norman foes. 3 days later, Roger finally arrived to relieve Serlo's desperate situation, just in time to come head-to-head with the bulk of the Saracen army. The vanguard regrouped and joined the main Muslim ranks. The Norman count led a cavalry charge into his enemy, but was repulsed. Following that, he had barely enough time to form a defensive line before the sheer weight of the Muslim army crashed down upon his meager force. Despite being massively outnumbered, and against all odds, the Norman line held, with their heavy armor and knightly discipline being once more the deciding factor in battle. Serlo, meanwhile, had sallied out of Cerami, slammed into the Muslim left flank with his cavalry, and began to carve a bloody path through an ocean of lightly armored Saracens towards his Norman comrades. As day turned to evening, Muslim morale collapsed, and they fled the field.
Oh wow.
Malaterra claims that the Normans slew over 20,000 men at Cerami, but this is once again likely an exaggeration. Nevertheless, they had won yet another highly unlikely victory. Much like how the Battle of Civitate had cemented their presence in the southern Italian mainland, the Battle of Cerami established the permanence of the Normans in Sicily. While the Normans had secured their control over the northeastern part of the island, their conquest of all Sicily was slowed exponentially in the years that followed. In 1064, both Roger and Robert mustered their levies and laid siege to Palermo, knowing that control over the immensely prosperous capital city was the only way to guarantee dominion over the whole island. During the siege, their camp was thoroughly infested by a species of venomous tarantula. Following this, the Normans made the completely and utterly reasonable decision to abandon the entire campaign. The years that followed saw Sicilian expansion delayed by wars fought on other fronts. Robert returned to Apulia to once more put down the perpetual rebellions in his domain. Without the aid of his brother's army, Roger was able to hold his Sicilian territory, but was prevented from making any significant land gains into the regions still dominated by Muslim emirs. After a few years of lull, the gears of war once more began to turn. In 1068, Roger won a decisive victory over the Muslims in an engagement outside the town of Missolmeri, which forced the Muslims of Sicily to begin turning on themselves. The Kalbids of Palermo, led by Ibn Hawis, resolved that it was the interference of the North African Zirids that had led to their demise, and led an uprising against their rule. As riots broke out in Palermo, Ibn Hawis was killed, and the Zirid princes, deciding they had lost enough in Sicily, packed up and returned to North Africa. Muslim Sicily was now leaderless, and deprived of the bulk of its army. Its capital lay helpless to invasion. In the year 1071, Robert Guiscard capped off a long and grueling campaign in Apulia when he finally conquered Bari, ending the Byzantine presence in Italy once and for all. With the southern mainland firmly in Norman hands, the full might of the Franco-Norsemen could be finally rendered upon Palermo, the jewel of the Mediterranean. Indeed, the city soon fell to the combined might of the Hauteville brothers, and by 1072 was fully in Norman hands. The Islamic rump state in Sicily was given a reprieve, as the Hautevilles turned their conquering armies towards Naples, Amalfi, Salerno and Abruzzo. But by now, their fate was inevitable. Roger had been made the first Count of Sicily, the vassal of his brother, the Duke of Apulia. In 1085, he conquered Syracuse, the last great Muslim city in Sicily. In 1091, Noto, the final Islamic outpost, fell to the relentless de Hauteville, ending nearly 2 centuries of Muslim rule on the island. For the next 100 years, the borders of the Norman realm would go largely unchanged. While the region had new masters, its people remained diverse. The Normans, alongside their Orthodox Greek and Muslim Arab subjects, created perhaps the most culturally dynamic kingdom in the history of medieval Europe. The sponsor of this video, Call of War, allows you to take command of your nation's army during the darkest hours of human history, the Second World War. In this free online strategy game, you get to fight up to 100. In the next episode, we will explore just what made Norman Italy so unique. So make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have...
That was a weird ad at the end of the video. It was a weird like segue into an ad because I don't think anybody expected the ad right there, especially when they had given it at like the first part of the video. So yeah, that's the video. Talk to you guys in the next video. Thank you guys for 962 subscribers. Want to get down to subscribers by my birthday, so keep subscribing to the channel. And yeah, talk to you guys in the next video, and peace.